Ramadan.
So, dear viewers and listeners, the scenes of destruction that's just been on your screen is from the story we brought to you when we began the program this morning. The total destruction of Al-Shifa hospital and the area around it, the killing of more than 300 Palestinians and perhaps even up to 400 Palestinians in that 2-week siege, the brutalization, torture, mutilation of bodies, and burial under the rubble and bulldozers by the Israeli occupation forces of Al-Shifa hospital, which was besieged for 2 weeks and has now been completely destroyed. That's what you were viewing on your screen. And to help us unpack the implications of this destruction of Gaza's largest hospital complex, we have on the line with us Professor at the University of Tehran in Iran, Seyed Mohammad Marandi. Professor, welcome to Salam Media and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As I said, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about these scenes we've seen playing out before our eyes, as I said, for the last 2 weeks? The utter besiegement and total destruction that the Israeli forces have left in their wake. What are the implications of this for a possible ceasefire, given that there are currently talks ongoing in Cairo between Hamas and Israeli officials?
Well, these are quite stunning developments. We know that the Israeli regime, for the second time, attacked this hospital, and it has utterly wrecked it. It has gone inside and executed physicians, female physicians, male physicians, and other medical staff. They've executed children, and they have executed tens of people with their hands bound. In other words, people who'd already been taken hostage, who'd been captured by the regime and who were held, they were then afterwards executed. And their tanks had gone over people. They had flattened people with their bulldozers, and they've totally wrecked the hospital, which will have huge implications in the weeks and months ahead, because those who are injured, those who are ill, will have nowhere to go. And a large number of the medical staff has also been taken. They've been taken hostage. They've disappeared. No one knows what will happen to them. No one knows where they are. And this is just one instance. The regime has destroyed hospitals across Gaza, and this is a part of the genocide. This will, of course, have implications. The regime is trying to create as much pain and suffering as possible to get concessions at the negotiating table. They have lost the battle on the ground. They have failed to defeat the resistance. The resistance is active across Gaza. After 6 months, the Israelis have gotten nowhere. So since they've been defeated on the battlefield, the only way they feel that they can gain concessions and put pressure on the Palestinian negotiators is through massacres, through killing women and children, something that we've been seeing day and night. But I would like to remind your audience, thing that they all know, but which should always be remembered, and that is none of this could continue or none of this could have happened without the full support of the West, without the West constantly providing them with funding, aid and assistance, trade and business carried out as normal, and also, of course, giving them weapons, ammunition, and other supplies needed. And in addition to all that, the West has systematically been able to prevent aid and assistance from getting into Gaza. In other words, they are themselves a part of the starvation siege and the genocide.
Absolutely. I think there are at least 4 or 5 Western governments who quite literally have blood on their hands, both in terms of providing financial support and military support or military equipment to the occupation regime, but also in terms of the enforced starvation that is happening in the north, as you've said. Now, as we unpack the story about Al-Shifa, we've got very conflicting accounts coming out. We've got Ismail Al-Tawab, the director of the um, Gaza media office, saying that Israeli forces killed 400 Palestinians in and around the hospital, including a woman doctor and her son, who was also a doctor, and put the entire facility out of action. I quote from him: "They bulldozed the courtyards, burying dozens of bodies in the rubble, turning the place into a mass graveyard." On the other hand, while Hamas and the medics themselves deny any armed presence in the hospital complex, Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari said that the site had been a major operating center by the Palestinian armed groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And the Israelis are, of course, claiming this as a victory, saying they've cleared Hamas out of this hospital complex. But really, Professor, is there any evidence at all that there was a Hamas presence in the hospital? We know that over 6,000 refugees who had been made homeless had been sheltering there 2 weeks ago when the siege of the hospital began. But really, I've yet to come across any tangible evidence that there was a military presence of any resistance group in the hospital. What do you have to say about that?
No, there is absolutely no evidence that Hamas or Islamic Jihad had any presence in the hospital. The very fact, as you executed also a physician working in the hospital, shows what they were after. And it was not just them. It's just this mother and son are more famous because they were murdered there.
Mm-hmm.
They've killed medical staff. They've destroyed the hospital facilities, all of the facilities in the hospital. What does that have to do with
Yes, absolutely.
people? There's extensive footage of families searching for their loved ones, digging them up, finding their
Mm-hmm.
bodies. All of these are ordinary citizens. The regime carries out an outrage and an atrocity. They always justify it somehow. The West also tries to justify their actions as well by repeating anything that the Israeli regime says. If you recall, the very first hospital, the Al-Ahli hospital, that was bombed
Mm-hmm.
by the Israelis, where hundreds of people were killed. Immediately, the Israeli regime said that it was Hamas or Islamic Jihad that mistakenly hit the hospital with a rocket. Whereas a rocket could never have caused such devastation. It was a huge
Absolutely.
bomb dropped from a jet. Western media tried to say that it was the Palestinians. Then when they attacked this hospital, they said there were extensive tunnels underground and that this was a command bunker. And they showed the world nothing. If you recall, they went and pretended that they were showing the tunnels, and it became clear that it was all fake. And that's what they
Mm-hmm.
did to hospitals, not only in the north in Gaza City, but in the central part of the Gaza Strip, to the south of the Gaza Strip, wherever there were hospitals, wherever there was critical infrastructure, they would attack those and justify them. But we all know that the objective is to create death and desperation. They've destroyed the infrastructure. They're preventing food from getting in. This is all an attempt to increase the number of children who die, to increase the number of citizens to die, because as the Israeli regime has said in the past, that every now and then they go into Gaza to mow the
Mow the
grass.
lawn. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And that means to cut down the population. This
Hmm.
is the truth behind the policies of this genocidal, evil regime that has no moral legitimacy and that has no place in West Asia.
Indeed, it's really, I think, certainly a systematic ethnic cleansing over decades, and now a systematic genocide, as you've pointed out, Professor. It is really heartbreaking to see it happen in real time on our screens. But I think if it had not, the world would have continued to be silent on this, would not have known of this. So while regimes around the West and in the global North have been largely silent or supportive of this genocide in each and in their own way, particularly the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and members of the European Union, and also, of course, the Australian state, we have seen that what is happening in Gaza coming to us from citizen journalists and some very brave and courageous journalists, many of whom have been targeted as well. The deliberate targeting of journalists and of healthcare workers is evident of the intent of this, as you have called them, evil genocidal occupation regime in Israel. And we need to actually, I think, become much more savvy as consumers of the media, with regard to the misinformation and disinformation and propaganda that is being put out. As I read to you what the spokespeople have said, Naftali Bennett has gone on Twitter and made similar statements claiming this as a victory. And yet you see that journalists in Gaza on the ground are saying, for example, Samir Basel says, I haven't stopped crying since I arrived here. Horrible massacres were committed by the occupation here. He was talking to Reuters. He said, the place is destroyed. This place needs to be rebuilt. There is no Shifa hospital anymore. And we've seen video footage showing Palestinians returning to retrieve mattresses and other belongings and finding nothing. Saying they've tried to seek shelter at schools and other complexes and was told that there is nowhere for them to go. So this utter devastation of a major healthcare facility appears to have been not just deliberate but targeted. And specifically, we've had reports of healthcare workers and doctors actually taking off their scrubs and putting on civilian clothes if they went from building to building or they left one of the hospital buildings, because it appears that the snipers were specifically lying in wait to target and shoot healthcare workers at point blank range. A very sad situation indeed. And Professor Marandi, thank you so much for sharing with us your perspective on this. Before we let you go, do you have perhaps any last words for our listeners and viewers?
We all have a huge responsibility to create greater awareness. Your audience, everyone has to be active, online, on the streets. I think that we have to boycott not only anything that has to do with the Israeli regime, but we have to boycott products of those countries that facilitate this genocide. I have no doubt that the people of Palestine will ultimately overcome and they will defeat this apartheid and genocidal regime, just like the people of South Africa.
Inshallah, we certainly hope so. And these are the last 10, in the last 10 days of Ramadan, the very blessed days of Ramadan, when we are told that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers our du'as. And if we perhaps, inshallah, as a global ummah, focus our du'as and our prayers and our pleas to our Rabb on the people of Gaza, inshallah, we know that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that Dua is the one thing that can change qadr. So let us collectively, inshallah, do whatever we can, whether it's on social media, on whatever channels we have available to us, but also use the very important spiritual channel we have available to us, that of dua and of pleading with our Lord for a change in the circumstances of the Palestinians, of our brothers and sisters in this ummah. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Jazakallahu khair, and wishing you a very peaceful and blessed rest of Ramadan and inshallah Eid next week.
The same to you and your very good audience.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. With that, we go to an ad break.